Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're taking a deep dive into something that's becoming more and more important to all of us.
Oh, yeah,
Cyber threats.
absolutely.
We've got this pretty hefty report
Yeah, this was a big one.
from the Canadian government, Cyber Threat Assessment 2025-2026.
Uh-huh.
And it's basically trying to, look into the future. What's going to be keeping those cybersecurity experts up at night?
Yeah, and it's not just experts. This report really gets into how cyber incidents, how they could actually impact your everyday life.
Really?
Like work, travel, online shopping, even healthcare is in there.
Yeah, it makes you think about those long lines at gas stations.
Oh, yeah.
Back during that Suncor hack in 2023.
Yeah.
Really hits home. One thing I found interesting in this report
Mm-hmm.
is they actually name names. Like they point to specific countries
Right.
that they think pose the biggest cyber threats.
Absolutely. They actually call out what they call the big three
Okay.
in cyber espionage and disruption.
Yeah.
China, Russia, and Iran,
Wow. All right.
each with their own, unique motives and methods.
So let's start with China.
Okay.
You highlighted a section in your notes here about their focus on intellectual property theft.
Right.
What was it about that kind of struck you?
Well, it's not just about stealing secrets, right?
Yeah.
The report is saying that China actually sees this as a key part of their strategy,
Interesting.
for achieving economic and technological dominance.
Yeah.
And it's not just big companies they're going after.
Uh-huh.
They're targeting universities, research institutions.
Really? So basically anything that could give them an edge.
Exactly.
I was surprised by, how directly they're targeting Canada.
Mm-hmm.
We're not exactly like a global superpower, right?
Well, and that's what's so interesting. The report highlights how China is, more and more focused on Canada. Government networks, officials,
Really?
especially ones who have been critical of the Chinese Communist Party. Remember that whole thing with the
Oh, right.
targeting of the Interparliamentary Alliance on China?
You're talking about the Canadian politicians who got those spy emails.
That's the one.
Sounds like a spy thriller or something.
Yeah, it really does. But this is the reality now, unfortunately.
Gosh.
And their tactics are evolving. They're getting even more sophisticated.
Uh-huh.
The report suggests that they're shifting their focus to critical infrastructure
Okay.
in North America, potentially to disrupt the U.S.
But wouldn't that impact Canada too? I mean, we're pretty interconnected with the U.S.
Exactly, and especially when you think about things like power grids.
Yeah.
The report makes it clear that any attack on critical infrastructure in the U.S., it could have serious ripple effects in Canada.
Okay, so China is one to watch.
Definitely.
All right, what about Russia? I know the report mentions this idea of hybrid warfare.
Right.
What does that mean in the context of cyber threats?
So basically, it's about combining those cyber attacks with online disinformation campaigns
So that's how they...
to just sow chaos, really, and undermine trust in Western institutions.
So it's like a double whammy.
Yeah, it really is. They're not just trying to hack systems. They're also trying to manipulate, how we think
It's like psychological warfare.
and create divisions in society.
Oh, wow. And they're getting bolder, right? I remember the report mentioned that attack on Kyivstar.
Right, the Ukrainian telecom company.
Yeah, it's a pretty big deal, wasn't it?
It was a game changer. That was a destructive wiper attack.
Yeah.
Designed to destroy data and cause disruption.
Wow.
Massive internet outages across Ukraine.
And this report suggests that this is, just the tip of the iceberg.
That's what they're saying.
And they're saying that Russia's likely to increase its targeting of critical infrastructure in the West.
Mm.
Do they mention Canada specifically?
Yes, actually they do.
Really?
The report highlights these activities from pro-Russia hacktivist groups. They're actively targeting Canada.
Wow.
And these groups, they can be linked to the Russian government.
Mm.
And they're aiming to influence our foreign policy, particularly when it comes to our support for Ukraine.
So they're trying to pressure us to change our stance.
It seems that way.
How effective have these attacks actually been so far?
Well, so far they've mostly been DDoS attacks,
Oh, okay.
which, designed to overwhelm websites and make them inaccessible.
Right.
They've caused some disruption, but nothing too serious yet.
Okay.
But the report warns that these groups could escalate their tactics
Oh, no.
and start targeting critical infrastructure.
That's a little scary.
It is a bit worrisome.
Okay, let's move on to the third member of Big Three, as they're calling them.
Yeah.
Iran.
Right.
What is their cyber game all about?
Iran's program is different from China's and Russia's.
Okay.
Their focus is on, I would say, coercion and repression.
Interesting.
They're using these cyber tactics to silence opponents, both within Iran and abroad. It's less about stealing secrets and more about, controlling information and suppressing dissent.
I see. You actually highlighted this section about their use of social engineering, right?
Can you explain that for us? What is it and how are they using it?
So social engineering is basically tricking people
Tricking them how?
into giving up sensitive information or clicking on malicious links. And the report says that Iran is getting really good at this.
Uh-huh.
They're leveraging the Flight 752 tragedy in their schemes, even.
Oh, wow. That's,
They're pretty awful.
exploiting a tragedy like that for their own benefit.
Yeah, it really is.
It's pretty despicable.
It highlights how ruthless they can be.
Wow.
And the report warns that any escalation in Canada-Iran relations
Right.
could make Canada a more prominent target for Iranian cyber operations.
So we're potentially in their crosshairs?
Yeah, potentially.
What kind of attacks could we be looking at?
It's hard to say. The report doesn't get specific, but it suggests that Iran could use cyber attacks to disrupt Canadian businesses, spread disinformation,
Oh, wow.
or even try to influence our elections.
Okay, so we've got these big three, China, Russia, and Iran. But the report also mentions some other emerging players.
In this whole cyber threat landscape, right?
Yeah. Two countries that are rapidly developing their capabilities are India and North Korea.
Interesting. What are their motives?
Okay, so India's cyber program is primarily focused on espionage
Espionage.
and countering what they see as anti-India narratives online, basically.
Okay.
And the report specifically notes that they're likely targeting Canadian government networks.
Wow. It's a reminder that, in the cyber world, even allies can have different interests.
Absolutely.
It's complicated.
Very complicated.
All right, what about North Korea? We always hear about their hacking activities.
Right. North Korea, they're all about the money. They're using cybercrime to fund their regime.
Yeah, so
We're talking ransomware attacks,
Oh.
cryptocurrency theft, anything to bring in revenue.
What are they targeting in Canada specifically?
The report highlights their increasing sophistication in targeting healthcare institutions.
Attacking hospitals.
It's particularly concerning.
That seems especially cruel even for cybercriminals.
It is. And it just highlights the fact that, cybercrime is a global problem and it's only getting worse.
Before we move on to the details of cybercrime in general, what's your big takeaway from all this? I mean, from this whole section on state-sponsored threats?
What strikes me is how much the cyber world is becoming a reflection of the physical world.
Oh, interesting.
You've got geopolitical tensions, economic competition, ideological conflicts.
No.
It's all playing out in cyberspace. And the lines are getting blurred.
Mm.
It's hard to tell who's a state-sponsored actor, who's a criminal group, who's a hacktivist.
Right.
They're all interconnected.
Yeah.
And they're all evolving.
That's a very sobering thought, and it makes
Yeah.
you realize, how important it is to understand this landscape and what's at stake.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's not just a reflection, though.
Oh,
It's more like an extension.
okay.
What happens in cyberspace, it has real-world consequences. And that's what I think this report is really trying to get across.
It's true. It's easy to think of cyber threats as something like abstract, something that's happening out there in the digital world.
Right, right.
But the line is definitely blurring.
Definitely. And the report doesn't just focus on those state actors either.
Right.
Cybercrime is a huge problem.
It is.
And it's growing. And one of the biggest developments is this rise of what they call cybercrime as a service.
Okay.
You can think of it like online shopping for criminals.
So like Amazon for cyber criminals.
Exactly. You can buy anything you need to launch an attack, even if you're not that tech savvy.
That's a little unsettling.
It is. It makes cybercrime very accessible.
Yeah.
The report mentions this thing called the Genesis market as an example.
Oh, right. Can you remind us what that was all about?
So the Genesis market was an online marketplace where criminals could buy and sell stolen data.
What kind of data are we talking?
Yeah, everything. Login credentials, digital fingerprints, you name it. It was like a one-stop shop for cyber criminals.
And they shut it down, right?
They did eventually.
Yeah.
But the report warns that these types of marketplaces they just keep popping up.
So it's whack-a-mole. You know what this report has me thinking?
What's that?
Maybe we need something like a digital citizenship code.
Oh, interesting.
To help people understand how important individual responsibility is online.
I love that idea. Like a digital version of the golden rule, right?
Yeah.
Treat others online as you'd want to be treated.
Right, exactly.
But I think it's even deeper than that.
Okay.
It's about being informed, being critical, and not becoming part of the problem.
It's like we need a whole new way of thinking about our behavior online.
It's a shift in mindset, for sure.
Yeah. We talk a lot about what governments and big organizations need to do,
Mm,
but individuals have to step up too, right?
absolutely. Especially with how sophisticated these cyber criminals are getting.
Oh, for
It's
sure.
not just, teenagers in basements anymore. This report highlights that they're using AI, creating deepfakes, automating attacks, writing malicious code.
Right.
They're constantly evolving to stay ahead.
I remember reading about this thing called living off the land,
Oh, yeah.
which is basically hiding in plain sight. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
They use legitimate tools and processes to carry out their attacks.
So sneaky.
It is. And they're getting better at covering their tracks, too.
Oh.
Routing attacks through domestic infrastructure to make it look like they're coming from within the country.
So it's almost impossible to know who's behind it.
It makes it really hard to attribute attacks.
It's like a shadowy world
It really is.
of digital espionage,
And sabotage.
and nobody knows the rules.
And the rules are constantly changing.
That's what makes this report so valuable, right?
It does. It gives us a glimpse into this hidden world.
Yeah.
Helps us understand the threats we face and the vulnerabilities that need to be addressed.
Like a roadmap
Exactly like a roadmap.
to navigate this whole digital minefield.
The digital minefield. I like that.
So, thinking about this roadmap,
Mm-hmm.
what are some of the key takeaways? What are they saying needs to be done?
One of the big things they emphasize is collaboration.
Okay.
Governments, businesses, individuals, everyone needs to work together.
We can't just rely on somebody else to take care of it.
Exactly. We're all in this together.
And investing in cybersecurity. Right.
Oh, absolutely.
Both in terms of technology and expertise.
You got it. It's like any other critical infrastructure.
Yeah.
We need to invest in maintaining it.
And that includes training and education, right?
Of course. Equipping people with the knowledge and skills to protect themselves.
It's like we need digital self-defense classes for everybody.
I love that analogy.
But it's not just individuals.
Right.
Organizations need to step up their game too.
For sure. Strong security protocols.
Okay.
Things like multi-factor authentication, data encryption, regular security audits.
And incident response plans.
Yes. Being prepared for when, not if, an attack happens.
Yeah, because it's going to happen.
It's not a matter of if, it's when. And that can minimize the damage, right?
It can. A quick and effective response can really make a difference.
And they talk about the importance of proactive threat intelligence, too.
Right. Sharing information about new threats and vulnerabilities.
So we can all be prepared.
And stay ahead of the curve.
It's like having a global network of cyber watchdogs.
I love that. Keeping an eye out for trouble.
And it highlights the need for international cooperation, right?
Absolutely. Cyber threats don't care about borders.
Nope.
We're all connected, so we need to work together to protect this digital world.
I'm curious, you've been digging deep into this report.
I have.
What's been the most surprising thing you've learned?
Honestly, it's just the sheer scale and complexity of it all.
Yeah, this report is dense.
It is. It's incredibly detailed, and it just lays bare how deeply cyber threats have permeated every part of our lives.
It's a little overwhelming,
It can be.
but it's also a call to action, right?
Absolutely. We all need to take this seriously
Yeah.
and work together to build a more resilient digital future. I agree. This whole deep dive into the cyber threat assessment report has been really eye-opening.
It has been.
It's definitely given us a lot to think about.
A lot to think about, and hopefully a lot of motivation to be more proactive.
Exactly. Well said. But before we wrap up,
Mm-hmm.
the report actually identifies 5 specific trends that are shaping the future of this threat landscape.
They do.
And we've already touched on a couple of them.
Right, the AI and the exploitation of edge devices.
But there are 3 more I think are worth exploring.
Definitely. And they're all connected in some really interesting ways.
Okay, well, let's dive into those. I'm ready for round 2. Okay, let's unpack these last 3 trends. Hit me with it.
All right, so trend number 3, they're calling it geopolitically inspired hacktivism in the report. Basically, it's like global events are spilling over into cyberspace.
Yeah, we touched on those pro-Russia groups targeting Canada for supporting Ukraine,
Mm-hmm.
but this goes way beyond just one conflict, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. Anytime you've got, international tensions or events that spark strong opinions, those opinions are finding an outlet online through these hacktivist groups.
So instead of protesting in the streets, they're like taking to the keyboard.
Exactly. And these groups can be really unpredictable. Their motives, their targets, even their tactics, it can all shift so fast. Makes them really tough to, track and defend against.
It's like a whole new battleground has opened up.
It really is.
And the report even said that sometimes the lines between these hacktivists and state-sponsored actors can get kind of blurred.
Yeah. can be tough to tell. Some groups might have unofficial ties to governments, adding a whole other layer of complexity. It's a murky world out there.
For sure. Okay, so that's geopolitically inspired hacktivism, trend number 3. What's next one?
Trend number 4 is all about vendor concentration. Kind of like how we were talking about relying on just a handful of big tech companies for, well, everything.
Yeah, putting all our eggs in one basket.
Exactly. And the report argues that this is actually making us more vulnerable.
How so?
Well, if one of these tech giants gets hacked, the impact could be massive. Think about those Microsoft Exchange breaches. That impacted thousands of organizations around the world.
It's a good point. Makes you think maybe we need more diversification in the tech sector. So if one provider goes down, we've got backups. Spread the risk a little.
Exactly. Building more resilience into our systems. And it's not just about individual companies. Governments need to think about this too. Like with critical infrastructure, instead of just having one company provide all the software for the power grid, you have multiple providers so you can withstand those cyber shocks.
Right, makes sense. Okay, so vendor concentration, check. What about the final trend? This is number 5.
Yeah, this one's interesting and maybe a bit scary. They call it dual-use services in the crosshairs.
Dual-use services, remind me what that means again.
Basically, services or technologies that have both civilian and military applications. Think satellite communication systems, GPS, even cloud computing.
Right, so things that we rely on every day, but also have that strategic military value.
Exactly. So if you can disrupt an enemy's access to these services, huge advantage.
I can see that. But what's scary is, what if those attacks end up impacting civilians too?
Well, that's the thing. There can be those unintended consequences. The report uses the example of an attack on a satellite system, intended to disrupt military communications. But it could also take out air traffic control, knock out internet service for a huge area.
Wow, so it's like the cyber battlefield is expanding to include like the basic services that make our world run.
It is. It makes you realize we need to think about cybersecurity more broadly, not just protecting individual systems, but the whole digital infrastructure that we all depend on.
So this has been, an intense deep dive. These 5 trends, they're painting a pretty complex picture of what the future holds. It's a lot to process. If you had to pick, like, one thing that listeners should be most concerned about, what would it be?
I'd say the biggest takeaway is that the cyber threat landscape is constantly changing. What we know today might not be relevant tomorrow. That's why it's so important to stay informed, stay aware of the risks, and take those steps to protect yourself and your data.
It's a lot of responsibility, but we can do it. This report is definitely a wake-up call for all of us to step up our game and work together.
It is. The future of cyberspace depends on it.
Well said. Thank you so much for helping us break all this down. Your insights have been invaluable.
It was my pleasure. Always happy to talk cyber.
And to everyone listening, remember, cybersecurity is a shared responsibility. We all have a role to play. For more information and tips, check out the Canadian Cyber Centre's website. We'll include a link in the show notes. Until next time, stay safe, stay vigilant, and stay informed.